Please call 911. Something is wrong. Lauren Hayes stared at the message on her phone for several seconds before finally pressing send. She had imagined many things going wrong in her marriage. She had imagined lonely dinners. She had imagined broken promises. She had even imagined discovering secrets she did not want to know. But she had never imagined sitting alone inside a 20,000 square foot mansion, 8 months pregnant, wondering whether the one person who was supposed to answer would even look at his phone. Outside, rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The estate looked perfect. The luxury cars sat neatly in the circular driveway. The fountains glowed beneath landscape lighting. The house itself looked like something from a magazine cover. Yet none of that mattered now. Lauren lowered herself carefully onto the living room sofa and pressed a trembling hand against her stomach. Something felt wrong. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just wrong. The kind of feeling that quietly slips into a room and refuses to leave. She checked her phone again. Message delivered. No response. Across town, Derek Caldwell was attending what he had described as an important business dinner. That was the explanation he gave before leaving earlier that evening. Lauren wanted to believe him. She had spent months wanting to believe him. The problem was that every explanation had started sounding rehearsed. Every late night had started sounding familiar. Every apology had started sounding identical. Her phone remained silent. The ticking grandfather clock near the staircase suddenly seemed louder than usual. Tick, tick, tick. Lauren tried to stand, but immediately sat back down. The uneasy sensation returned. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing. Everything would be fine, she told herself. Derek would see the message. Derek would call. Derek would come home. Yet even as the thoughts formed, another part of her wondered why she no longer believed them. The screen lit up suddenly. Her heart jumped. But it was not Derek. It was a calendar notification reminding her about a doctor's appointment scheduled for the following week. Lauren laughed softly at the irony. It was the kind of laugh people make when they are too worried to cry. She looked around the massive room. The expensive artwork. The imported furniture. The grand piano nobody played. Every object represented success. Yet at that moment the mansion felt less like a dream and more like a museum dedicated to appearances. Another minute passed. Then another. No reply. Lauren opened the message thread again. For simple words stared back at her. Please call 911. Something is wrong. She had never sent anything like that before. Derek knew it, which meant one question kept echoing through her mind. If he had seen the message, why had he not answered? A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the room. The reflection in the glass caught her attention. For a brief second, she saw herself standing alone in the center of a house built for dozens of people. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Then her phone vibrated. Lauren grabbed it immediately. Her pulse quickened. Her hands shook. But the screen displayed something unexpected. Not a call. Not a text. Just a notification showing that her message had been opened. Read. Lauren stared at the screen. Relief lasted less than a second. Because no reply followed. No call arrived. No explanation appeared. The message had been read. And then nothing. Somewhere beyond the walls of the mansion, Derek Caldwell had looked directly at her plea for help. And for reasons Lauren could not possibly understand, he had chosen silence. 11 minutes earlier, she believed she knew the man she married. Now, sitting alone in the quiet glow of a luxury home that suddenly felt far too large, she found herself wondering whether she had ever known him at all. Across town, Derek Caldwell stared at the glowing screen for exactly 3 seconds. The message sat there between unread business notifications and promotional emails. Please call 911. Something is wrong. For a brief moment, his expression changed. Concern flickered across his face. Then it disappeared. Across the table, Vanessa Monroe tilted her head slightly. Everything okay? She asked. The upscale restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations and soft piano music. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, where rain streaked across the glass like silver lines. Derek locked his phone and forced a smile. Just work. Vanessa laughed. You always say that. Normally, he would have appreciated the joke. Tonight it sounded different. Sharper somehow. His phone remained face down beside his wine glass. The message lingered in his thoughts longer than he expected. Lauren never sent dramatic texts. In fact, she rarely texted him at all unless something genuinely mattered. That was precisely why the message unsettled him. Yet another voice inside his head immediately offered an explanation. She is probably overreacting. The thought arrived quickly, conveniently, comfortably. Derek had spent months convincing himself that every problem at home could wait until tomorrow. Every difficult conversation could wait until after the next meeting. Every concern could wait until business slowed down. Somehow business never slowed down. Vanessa continued talking about an upcoming charity gala. Derek nodded at appropriate moments while only hearing fragments of the conversation. His attention kept drifting toward the phone. Finally, he picked it up again. The message remained there, waiting. He opened the conversation thread. No additional texts. No missed calls. Nothing except those 4 words. Please call 911. Something is wrong. A small notification beneath the message confirmed it had been delivered. Read. Vanessa noticed his expression. That does not look like work. Derek hesitated. For a second, he considered calling Lauren. It would take less than a minute. 30 seconds, maybe. He could check on her and return to dinner. The reasonable choice stood directly in front of him. Then another thought appeared. If it were really serious, someone else would call. A doctor, a neighbor, security, someone. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. The logic felt thin even to him. Yet he accepted it anyway, because accepting it required less effort than questioning it. Across the restaurant, lightning flashed beyond the windows. The city briefly illuminated in pale white light. Vanessa reached for her glass. You look distracted. Derek smiled again. Long week. She seemed satisfied with the answer. Unfortunately, he was not. The phone remained in his hand. His thumb hovered over the screen. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet voice urged him to call home. Another urged him to leave the restaurant entirely. Instead, he opened the message one last time. Then he made a decision that would follow him for years. He deleted it. The screen cleared instantly. The conversation vanished from view. No evidence. No reminder. No uncomfortable choice waiting for him when dinner ended. Vanessa watched him slip the phone back into his pocket. Better? She asked. Derek nodded. Much better. Yet the strange thing was that he did not feel better. Not really. Because the moment the message disappeared, an unexpected feeling settled over him. Not guilt. Not yet. Something closer to unease. Like hearing a distant alarm and convincing yourself it belongs to someone else. Outside, the rain intensified. Inside, the piano continued playing. Vanessa smiled and resumed her story. Derek listened this time. Or at least he pretended to. Because somewhere beyond the city lights, inside a mansion that suddenly felt far too quiet, Lauren Hayes was still waiting for a response that would never come. And without realizing it, Derek Caldwell had just started a countdown of his own. Lauren Hayes stared at the phone long after the screen went dark. The silence felt different now. Before, it had carried uncertainty. Now it carried an answer. Derek had seen the message. Derek had chosen not to respond. The realization settled slowly, like cold rain soaking through fabric one drop at a time. She looked around the enormous living room again. Everything appeared exactly the same. The chandelier still glowed above the staircase. The fireplace still flickered softly against the stone wall. The expensive furniture remained perfectly arranged. Yet somehow the entire house felt unfamiliar, as though the truth hiding inside it had finally stepped into the light. Lauren reached for her phone and pressed Derek's contact. The call rang once, twice, 3 times, then voicemail. She ended the call without leaving a message. A few seconds later she tried again. Same result. Her heartbeat quickened. She wanted to believe he was simply busy. She wanted to believe there was some explanation she had not considered. But the deleted message she could not see was already shaping the future neither of them expected. Outside, the rain continued falling across the estate grounds. Water streamed down the massive windows overlooking the backyard. The world beyond the glass looked distorted and distant. Lauren carefully stood from the sofa and took a few slow steps. The uneasy feeling returned immediately. She stopped beside the kitchen island and gripped the marble countertop. Her breathing remained steady, but something inside her insisted she should not be alone. The thought repeated itself over and over. Do not stay alone. She looked toward the security monitor mounted near the hallway. Several camera feeds displayed different parts of the property. Front gate, driveway, garage, side entrance. Empty, quiet, no visitors, no movement, just rain. Her phone slipped slightly in her hand. She tightened her grip and opened her contacts. For a moment, she considered calling her father. Nathan Hayes would answer immediately. He always did. Yet another thought stopped her. She did not want to worry him unless absolutely necessary. The last thing she wanted was another conversation about Derek. Her father had spent the past year hiding concerns behind polite questions. He never criticized Derek directly. He never needed to. The pauses between his questions said enough. Lauren moved toward the dining room and lowered herself into a chair. A framed ultrasound image sat nearby on a side table. She picked it up and smiled faintly. For months, she had imagined introducing her child to a happy family. A complete family. Not a perfect family, just a loving one. Somewhere along the way, the dream had started feeling more fragile than she wanted to admit. Her phone suddenly vibrated. Hope surged through her chest. She looked down immediately. Not Derek. A weather alert. Heavy rainfall warning. She almost laughed again. The universe seemed determined to send every notification except the one she needed. Then another vibration followed. This time it was a motion alert from the home security system. Lauren frowned and opened it. The front driveway camera appeared on the screen. At first she saw nothing unusual. Rain. Empty pavement. Darkness. Then a figure entered the frame. A man wearing a delivery jacket running toward shelter beneath the front gate awning. He appeared to be checking directions on his phone. Lauren stared at the image. The stranger had no idea that a few hundred feet away, inside one of the largest homes in the county, a woman was sitting alone wondering why her husband had ignored a plea for help. The man disappeared from view moments later. Yet for reasons she could not explain, the brief glimpse of another human being brought her comfort. Because somewhere beyond the walls of the mansion, life was still moving. People were still paying attention. And as Lauren looked once more at the silent phone in her hand, she had no way of knowing that one stranger passing through the rain was about to become the difference between being forgotten and being found. The rain continued falling across the estate as Lauren Hayes stared at the security monitor. The delivery driver had already disappeared from the driveway camera, yet she found herself checking the screen again as though hoping he might return. Something about seeing another person outside the walls of the mansion had reminded her how isolated she truly was. The house suddenly felt enormous. Every room seemed farther away than before. Every hallway felt longer. Every shadow felt heavier. Lauren looked at her phone once more. No missed calls. No messages. No sign that Derek Caldwell had changed his mind. She slowly stood from the dining room chair and immediately regretted it. The uneasy sensation returned, stronger than before. She steadied herself against the table and closed her eyes for a moment. The grandfather clock downstairs continued its relentless ticking. Every second seemed louder now. Somewhere across the city, Derek was enjoying his evening. Somewhere inside this mansion, Lauren was running out of confidence that help would arrive. A sudden chime echoed through the house. Lauren's eyes opened immediately. The security system. Someone was at the front gate. She hurried toward the nearest monitor and pulled up the live feed. There he was again, the same delivery driver, standing beneath the awning while rain poured around him. He appeared frustrated, looking down at his phone repeatedly before glancing toward the mansion. Lauren frowned. The gate intercom remained silent. Then she noticed something unusual. The driver was not leaving. Most delivery drivers dropped packages and moved on. This man kept looking toward the house, as though something felt wrong. Lauren watched as he walked closer to the gate camera. For several seconds, he studied the property. Then he stepped back and raised his phone. A moment later, the mansion's front intercom rang. The sound startled her. Nobody used the intercom at this hour. Lauren answered. Hello. Static crackled briefly through the speaker. Then a male voice responded. Ma'am, I am sorry to bother you. I think I delivered a package here earlier today. Lauren hesitated. Okay. The man sounded uncertain. I know this sounds strange, but every light in the house is on, and I have been standing outside for several minutes. Nobody seems to be moving around. Lauren almost laughed at the irony. I am here. Relief entered the driver's voice immediately. Good. I was worried. The simple statement caught her off guard. A complete stranger had noticed something Derek ignored. Before she could respond, another wave of discomfort forced her to sit on a nearby bench. The driver must have heard something in her silence. Ma'am. Lauren took a slow breath. I am fine. Even she did not believe it. The pause that followed felt long. Then the driver spoke carefully. Respectfully, you do not sound fine. His honesty surprised her. Most people avoided uncomfortable truths. This stranger walked directly toward them. Lauren looked down at the phone in her hand, then toward the empty rooms surrounding her, then back to the security monitor. The driver remained standing in the rain, waiting. "Is there anyone else with you?" he asked. "No." Another pause. "Do you need me to call someone?" Lauren's eyes filled with emotion. She had been fighting all evening. Not because she wanted help from a stranger, because a stranger was the first person to offer it. The delivery driver glanced toward the mansion again. Something in his expression changed. Concern replaced uncertainty. He made a decision. "Ma'am, I am calling emergency services." Lauren opened her mouth to object, but before the words arrived, the flashing lights appeared through the rain less than 10 minutes later. Lauren Hayes sat near the front hallway, her phone resting loosely in her hand as the distant glow reflected across the wet windows. For the first time all evening, she did not feel completely alone. The delivery driver remained at the gate, waiting exactly where he promised he would. He could have left. Most people would have. Instead, he stayed. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Then the security cameras showed 2 emergency units turning through the front entrance. Relief washed over Lauren so suddenly that she almost started crying. Not because the situation was over, because someone had finally listened. Outside, the driver stepped aside as the vehicles stopped near the entrance. Several responders moved quickly toward the house. Within moments, the front door opened and professional voices filled the silence that had dominated the mansion for hours. One responder knelt beside Lauren while another asked calm questions. The atmosphere changed immediately. The uncertainty that had haunted the evening began giving way to action. Lauren answered as best she could. Someone gently reassured her. Someone else contacted the hospital. Everything felt strangely distant, like watching events unfold from across a room. Yet one detail remained crystal clear. Derek was still absent. The responders worked efficiently. One noticed the ultrasound photo resting on a nearby table. Another glanced toward the family portraits displayed throughout the house. Expensive vacations, charity galas, magazine-worthy smiles. The images suggested a perfect life. Tonight they looked like advertisements for a story that no longer existed. As preparations were made to transport Lauren for evaluation, one of the responders asked whether they should notify her husband. Lauren hesitated. The question felt heavier than it should have. Finally, she nodded. Yes. The responder requested a contact number. Lauren provided it. A call was placed immediately. No answer. A second call followed. Still nothing. The responder frowned slightly, but remained professional. We will keep trying. Lauren looked away. Somehow hearing a stranger fail to reach Derek hurt more than hearing silence herself. Outside, rain continued falling across the estate grounds. The delivery driver remained visible through the open doorway. One responder approached him briefly. Lauren could not hear the conversation, but she saw the man gesture toward the house and explain what he had witnessed. Moments later, the responder returned with a grateful expression. That man may have made all the difference tonight, he said quietly. Lauren closed her eyes. The statement lingered in her thoughts. A stranger noticed. A stranger cared. A stranger stayed. Across the city, Derek Caldwell laughed at something Vanessa Monroe had just said. The dinner had stretched later than expected. Empty plates sat between them. The restaurant had become quieter as other guests departed. Derek checked his phone briefly. Business emails. Calendar reminders. Market updates. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. The deleted message remained buried in a place he believed no one would ever see again. Yet an odd feeling persisted. The same unease that had followed him since leaving the restaurant entrance earlier. He could not explain it. He only knew that every few minutes he felt compelled to look at his phone again. Back at the mansion, Lauren was carefully escorted toward the waiting vehicle. The cold night air greeted her as she stepped outside. Rain mist drifted through the security lights. The delivery driver stood nearby beneath the awning. Their eyes met briefly. Lauren managed a faint smile. The man returned it with a simple nod. No dramatic speech. No heroic pose. Just quiet human decency. As the vehicle doors closed and the estate slowly disappeared behind rain-streaked glass, Lauren found herself thinking about something she had not considered before. Sometimes the people who save your life are not the people who promised they always would. And somewhere ahead, waiting beyond the hospital doors, a truth was moving steadily closer to the surface. A truth hidden inside a deleted message that was about to change everything. The hospital corridor felt colder than the rain outside. Bright lights reflected across polished floors while nurses moved quickly between rooms, their footsteps blending into the steady rhythm of a place that never truly slept. Lauren Hayes sat quietly on a hospital bed wrapped in a light blanket. The worst of the uncertainty had passed, but exhaustion remained. One hand rested protectively on her stomach. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the doorway, as if expecting someone to appear. Deep down, she already knew who would not. A doctor entered carrying a tablet and offered a reassuring smile. "You and the baby are stable," he said. The words lifted a weight she had been carrying all night. Lauren closed her eyes briefly and whispered a thank you. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe normally. The doctor reviewed several notes before pausing. "You were fortunate someone acted quickly." Lauren thought immediately of the delivery driver standing in the rain, a stranger whose name she still did not know. The doctor continued, "A delay could have created a very different situation." The sentence stayed with her long after he left the room. Across town, Derek Caldwell finally looked at the time and frowned. The evening had slipped away faster than expected. Vanessa was describing plans for an upcoming weekend event when his phone vibrated across the table. He glanced down casually. An unknown number. He ignored it. The call ended. Seconds later, another arrived. Different number. Same result. Vanessa noticed. "Popular tonight." Derek forced a smile. Probably business. Yet something about the repeated calls unsettled him. He picked up the phone and stepped away from the table. A third call appeared almost immediately. This time he answered. "Hello." The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Memorial Medical Center. We have been attempting to reach you regarding Lauren Hayes." Derek felt the world narrow around him. The noise of the restaurant faded. The city lights beyond the windows seemed distant. "What happened?" he asked. There was a pause. "Your wife was brought in earlier this evening. She is stable." Relief arrived first. Then confusion. "Earlier." The nurse confirmed the timeline. Derek's stomach tightened. "Earlier. Several hours earlier. Long before this phone call. Long before dessert. Long before he convinced himself everything could wait." "I am on my way," he said. When he returned to the table, Vanessa immediately knew something had changed. The confidence he carried all evening was gone. Derek gathered his jacket without offering an explanation. Minutes later, his car sped through rain-covered streets toward the hospital. During the drive, he replayed every moment from the evening. The message, the hesitation, the excuse, the deletion. For the first time, he stopped defending his decision and looked directly at it. The realization made him grip the steering wheel tighter. When he finally arrived at the hospital, the waiting room was nearly empty. A nurse directed him toward Lauren's floor. As the elevator doors closed, he caught his reflection in the polished metal wall. He looked exhausted, older somehow, not because of what happened to Lauren, because he already sensed something else approaching. A truth. The elevator opened. Derek stepped into the corridor and immediately spotted a familiar figure seated near Lauren's room. Nathan Hayes, Lauren's father. The billionaire businessman slowly rose from his chair. He did not look angry. Somehow that made the moment worse. Nathan simply stared at him for several long seconds before speaking. "She asked for you tonight." The words landed harder than any accusation. Derek opened his mouth to respond. Nothing came out. Nathan nodded once toward Lauren's door. "The question now is whether you deserve to walk through it." And somewhere inside the hospital's digital records, buried beneath timestamps and phone logs, a deleted message waited patiently for someone to discover it. Derek Caldwell stood motionless in the hospital corridor long after Nathan Hayes finished speaking. "The question now is whether you deserve to walk through it." The words echoed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. Nathan did not raise his voice. He did not make threats. Somehow that made the moment far worse. Derek had spent years negotiating with powerful people. He understood arguments. He understood pressure. What he did not understand was disappointment delivered without anger. Nathan slowly returned to his chair outside Lauren's room. The billionaire businessman looked exhausted, not because of financial battles or corporate decisions, because his daughter had needed help and nearly faced that night without it. Derek stared at the closed hospital room door. Only a few feet separated him from Lauren, yet the distance felt impossible to cross. A nurse emerged from a nearby station carrying a tablet. She paused after recognizing his name. "Mr. Caldwell?" Derek nodded. "Your wife is resting." Relief flickered across his face. Can I see her? The nurse hesitated. Briefly, Nathan said nothing. He simply watched. Derek stepped toward the door, then stopped. Through the small glass panel, he could see Lauren sleeping peacefully beneath soft hospital lighting. One hand rested across the blanket. Beside the bed sat the ultrasound photo she had carried with her from home. The sight hit him harder than he expected. For months he had convinced himself that work came first because he was building a future for his family. Tonight that explanation suddenly sounded hollow. Across the hallway, Nathan's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. Another call from the hospital administration. Since arriving, he had been helping coordinate paperwork, insurance matters, and family notifications. The responsibilities Derek should have handled had quietly fallen onto someone else. Nathan answered the call and stepped away. The corridor grew quiet again. A few minutes later, a hospital technology specialist approached the nurse's station carrying a laptop. Derek barely noticed until fragments of conversation reached him. We recovered the communication timeline, the specialist said. One nurse nodded. Good. The responding team requested a complete sequence. Derek felt a strange tension settle into his chest. Communication timeline. The words sounded harmless. Yet something about them immediately caught his attention. The specialist continued working while several digital records appeared across the screen. Emergency calls, arrival times, contact attempts, notification logs, everything connected to the evening. Hospitals documented everything. That was what hospitals did. Derek suddenly remembered the repeated calls he ignored at the restaurant. The unknown numbers. The voicemail alerts he never checked. The realization made him uncomfortable. Across town, Vanessa Monroe sat alone at the restaurant scrolling through social media. The evening had ended abruptly. Derek left without explanation. At first she assumed it was another business emergency. Then curiosity got the better of her. She opened his profile and noticed something unusual. Several mutual contacts were posting messages about Lauren. Prayers, support, hospital updates. Vanessa's expression slowly changed. She knew enough to understand what those posts implied. Back at the hospital, the technology specialist leaned closer to the screen. Interesting, he murmured. One of the nurses looked over. What is it? The specialist pointed toward a timestamp. There was an outgoing, emergency-related text earlier than we thought. Derek froze. Every muscle in his body tightened. The specialist continued reviewing data without realizing who stood nearby. Looks like it was opened almost immediately. Another pause followed. Then the specialist frowned. That is strange. The nurse looked curious. What? The specialist clicked through another screen. The message does not appear in the active conversation history anymore. Silence followed. Small, brief, yet powerful. Because for the first time that night, Derek understood something terrifying. The message he believed had disappeared forever was beginning to find its way back. The hospital corridor felt unnaturally quiet after the technology specialist's observation. The message does not appear in the active conversation history anymore. The sentence lingered in the air long after the conversation moved on. Derek Caldwell remained frozen near the nurse's station, staring at nothing. His mind raced through possibilities, each one leading to the same conclusion. The message had existed. The message had been opened. The message had disappeared. And there was only one person who knew exactly why. Across the hall, Nathan Hayes ended another phone call and returned to his seat. Years of business experience had taught him to recognize guilt when he saw it. Derek looked like a man carrying something far heavier than fear. Inside Lauren's room, the soft hum of medical equipment blended with the distant sounds of the hospital. She slept peacefully, unaware that the truth was beginning to surface outside her door. For the first time that evening, people were no longer asking what happened. They were beginning to ask why. The technology specialist continued reviewing records while a nurse stood nearby. The emergency team requested a complete timeline, he explained. Every call, every text, every contact attempt. The nurse nodded. Can deleted messages be recovered? The specialist gave a small shrug. Sometimes, especially when multiple systems recorded the activity. Derek felt his stomach tighten. Multiple systems. The words sounded harmless to everyone else. To him, they sounded like a countdown reaching zero. Across the city, social media updates about Lauren continued spreading through their circle of friends, business associates, and charitable organizations. People who admired the couple began asking questions. Why had Lauren been alone? Why had nobody reached her sooner? Why had a delivery driver been the one to call for help? Questions multiplied faster than answers. Back at the hospital, Nathan finally stood and approached Derek. Neither man spoke immediately. The silence between them carried its own conversation. After several seconds, Nathan broke it. "A stranger stood in the rain for my daughter tonight." Derek lowered his eyes. Nathan continued. "A stranger stayed when leaving would have been easier." Another pause. That is the part one cannot stop thinking about. Derek wanted to defend himself. He wanted to explain. He wanted to point toward business pressure, exhaustion, misunderstandings, anything that might reduce the weight crushing his chest. Yet every excuse sounded pathetic before it even formed. Because deep down he knew one simple fact. He had received the message. Nathan studied him carefully. "Did Lauren try to reach you?" The question landed like a hammer. Derek looked away. His silence answered before his voice could. Nathan nodded slowly. There was no anger in his expression, only disappointment. Somehow that hurt more. Nearby, the technology specialist's laptop emitted a soft notification sound. He clicked another window and frowned. Interesting. The nurse looked over. What now? He rotated the screen slightly. The message was opened 11 minutes before emergency services were contacted. 11 minutes. Derek closed his eyes. There it was. The missing piece. The exact stretch of time that changed everything. The nurse read the timestamp and quietly shook her head. 11 minutes can matter. Nobody noticed Derek gripped the back of a chair for support. Across the corridor, Lauren slowly opened her eyes. She looked toward the doorway and saw her father first. Relief softened her expression. Then she noticed Derek standing nearby. Their eyes met for only a second. Yet in that second something fundamental changed. Lauren did not look angry. She did not look shocked. She looked tired. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with hospitals or long nights. Tired of hoping. Tired of explaining. Tired of carrying a marriage by herself. And as the recovered timeline continued revealing the truth one timestamp at a time, Derek Caldwell began to realize that losing trust happens slowly, but sometimes it becomes visible all at once. Lauren Hayes looked at Derek Caldwell for several long seconds before turning her attention back to her father. The gesture was small, quiet, yet it carried more meaning than any argument ever could. Nathan Hayes moved closer to the bed and gently squeezed her hand. The tension in the room eased slightly. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Lauren felt safe. Not because the uncertainty had disappeared, not because difficult decisions were suddenly easy, but because she no longer felt alone. Outside the room, hospital staff continued reviewing records and timelines. Inside the room, something far more important was taking place. Clarity. Derek remained near the doorway. He wanted to speak. He wanted to explain. He wanted to somehow rewind the evening and make a different choice. Unfortunately, life did not work that way. 11 minutes earlier in the night, he believed every problem could wait. Now he understood that some moments never return once they pass. Lauren finally broke the silence. Her voice was calm, softer than Derek expected. "Did you see my message?" The question contained no accusation, no anger, just truth seeking another truth. Derek closed his eyes briefly. For a second, he considered giving a partial answer. A careful answer. A safer answer. Then he looked at Lauren and realized she deserved better than that. "Yes," he said quietly. The room became still. Nathan looked away, not because he was surprised, because hearing it spoken aloud made the reality impossible to ignore. Lauren nodded slowly. "And you chose not to call." Derek swallowed hard. "Yes." Another silence followed. Yet this one felt different. Not uncertain. Final. Lauren lowered her eyes toward the blanket. For months, she had questioned her instincts. For months, she had explained away disappointments and broken promises. Tonight, she finally stopped doing that. The truth stood clearly in front of her. The most painful part was not that Derek failed. It was that he made a choice. Across the room, Nathan remained quiet. He understood something many people never learn. There comes a moment when consequences no longer arrive through courts or contracts. They arrive through trust. And once trust leaves, money becomes irrelevant. Derek took a step forward. "Lauren, I am sorry." The words sounded sincere, because they were. Yet even as he spoke them, he understood their limitation. Some apologies repair damage. Others simply acknowledge it. Lauren looked at him with tired eyes. "I know you are sorry." Her answer surprised him. She was not questioning his regret. She was questioning whether regret changed anything. Morning sunlight began appearing through the hospital windows. The storm had finally passed. The city beyond the glass looked calm and clean, as though the night had never happened. But inside that room, everything had changed. A nurse entered briefly with updated information. Lauren and the baby were doing well. More good news followed. Relief spread across the room. Nathan smiled for the first time all night. Lauren closed her eyes and whispered a grateful thank you. Derek smiled too, yet his smile carried sadness, because the future he imagined was no longer guaranteed. Several days later, people would continue talking about the strange chain of events. The delivery driver who stayed, the emergency responders who arrived, the missing 11 minutes, the recovered message. But Lauren remembered something else. A stranger noticed when something felt wrong. A stranger chose compassion without obligation. A stranger acted when it mattered. As the sunlight filled the room, Nathan stood beside his daughter and looked toward the city skyline. Derek remained quietly near the door. No dramatic speeches followed. No perfect ending appeared. Only a simple truth. Some people lose fortunes and rebuild them. Some people lose reputations and recover them. But Derek Caldwell learned that certain opportunities arrive only once. And on a rainy night, when 4 words asked for help, he spent 11 minutes losing something that all the money in the world could never buy back.